Michael.
Hello, Solomon. For Matthew.
This is our friends to Matthew Hopkins, which finger you know. This movie has a huge spiritual message with lots of Christian subtext in each scene. But in the original tales, the character never faces demons and God never appears. So why you create this movie around religion?
Oh, because I think that Solomon Kane is a profoundly religious character. I think everything he does in Robert Howard's stories is driven by his belief that God is the man, the thing that directs his actions. He's Puritan, but I think Howard also said that he was a Puritan with a pagan heart, if you read, and that's something that allowed me to say, okay, we can explore demons and monsters. He fights harpies and weird creatures, and there's ancient magic in Africa when he goes there. And the creatures, the vampires and the ghouls, I mean, if those aren't demons, then I don't know what is. So from a movie point of view, I was just creating what I'd like to see on the screen. And I don't think that I've taken liberties with him as a character. What I did with this movie was to create the origins of him, which is the one liberty that I have taken in a way, because Robert Howard never explained why Kane is like who he is. Unless you really read between the lines of the stories and say, okay, I get from the Blue Flame of Vengeance, for instance, he says, I was a bad man who led a rout of ungodly people, and he's a little bit ashamed of that. And because the producers said to me, we want this to be an origins tale. That's your job as a writer, to find a way of telling the origins. I thought that would be an interesting way of going with him, because the redemption story is always an interesting story for a wider audience. Remember, we're trying to get this movie to go to people who are not just Solomon Kane fans, people who've never heard of Solomon Kane. So if at the end of this story, when they've watched the one on the screen, they go, let's get the Solomon Kane books, and then they rediscover him. And that's really the key for me, is just to try and make him open up a little bit.
Here's your last chance. Where is the girl? There is evil walking this earth.
Which was your first encounter with Robert Howard's writings, and why do you find it interesting?
Well, I'm a fantasy fan. I've read fantasy books my whole life, from the time I could read, and comics and what have you. And I read Solomon Kane as part of my teenage years as being a fantasy reader, and without being obsessed with it. It was just like, okay, I read Michael Moorcock, I read Julian May and Stephen Donaldson and the writers who were there, but you can't really read fantasy without coming across Robert Howard, because Conan is the first place everybody gets to him. And I like Conan plenty, but Kane was really an interesting character. Very, very dark, very direct, very serious, not very likable in many, many ways. And I read him, and that was it. I never imagined for a second I'd get the chance to make a movie of him. So when the producers called me and said, we need a writer to write for this character that we bought called Solomon Kane, have you heard of him? It's like, hell yeah. You're gonna make a movie of Kane? Fantastic, I'm completely on board that. Give me the chance. Let me take this character and try and preserve as much of what he is in the book as possible for the big screen. And that's kind of really, really what I wanted to get to. So, and the idea was, the end of the movie, you've seen the movie, right?
Yes.
He is Solomon Kane, right? So that then, in the next movies, if we make the next movies, we can plug straight into Howard's stories.
You said that if the movie is successful, you want to make a trilogy.
Yeah.
You are going to adapt Red Shadows or Wings of the Night in the possible sequels?
I absolutely think that those stories, Wings of the Night I love, and Red Shadows, of course, will become part of the movie number 2. I want to find out about the Juju staff. I want to see Nlonga. I want to see Leloup. I want to see all those character elements come together. But I mean, I really, really want to use the backdrop of Africa in the 16th century, slave traders, evil creatures there. I think that's going to be fantastically unusual as well. I've never seen that before. And really high adventure, which we haven't seen for a long, long time. First Kane movie is very serious and very dark, and it establishes the character. I think the second movie we can start having a lot more fun with him, and go to places which haven't been seen for a long time.
Solomon Kane is obviously a pulp character, and one of your previous films, Death Watch, has lots of elements from the 20s horror stories. What do you think about the influence of Pulp Fiction in modern fantasy cinema? Interesting
question. I mean, there's no doubt about that the pulp writers of the period, I mean, the godfathers of everything we do now, Robert Howard, Lovecraft, all those guys, writing for the Weird Tales magazines, they invented the genre, We have Lord of the Rings, everyone says that's fantasy, but Tolkien came after Howard, And this guy, in 10 years of incredible, furious writing, he invented so many worlds and so many ideas. So and he was sort of forgotten about for a long time as well. Movies were getting made and nobody was saying, listen, Howard is the guy who really started all this off. We should be paying him some respect. So I think the influence is enormous, and I think guys like Guillermo del Toro and the other filmmakers around will definitely say to you, Howard is part of the influence. Whether they're aware of it or not, that's the kind of thing. It's like if you're going to say, I make fantasy movies, well, you can't know every book that's ever been written, but there are a few key characters in the canon that you should really know about, and Howard is one of them. I hear they're going to make another Conan movie. I can't wait to see that. I hope it's good. I hope it's more like Conan than the original movies. Because for me, Schwarzenegger's Conan was not the proper Conan. They're good movies, but not what it is. I mean, I think Cull is going to get made again. I know I did a draft of Bran McMorn. And I don't know how that script's going to go now. So there's lots and lots of stuff to be explored in his world, and some of his short stories as well. Pigeons from Hell. There's a few fun ideas. His horror stories are quite interesting. So yeah, there's lots and lots to be done with him, and he's the godfather of it all.
You said that Michael Moorcock is the very reason you love fantasy. What are your favorite fantasy writers beyond Moorcock and Howard?
Oh, that's not a fair question. Which is my favorite writer? I have to say I've read more Michael Moorcock than I have Robert Howard. And he was, my friends gave me Moorcock when I was a kid. So he's the first fantasy writer that I really read. And Michael Moorcock does pulp fantasy. So you sort of go back, where did he start? And I know that he's a fan of Robert Howard. So you go back and read those as well. So I have to say, I like Julian May. I loved The Many-Coloured Lands, which is kind of sci-fi fantasy. Stephen Donaldson's Thomas Covenant series I absolutely thought was wonderful, and there's the kind of the Anne McCaffrey stuff and the dragon, and they're sort of romantic fantasy, and I never liked the romantic fantasy. I like the hard action fantasy, men with swords and sorcerers and monsters, sword and sorcery. That's exactly what it is. And I like Ray Harryhausen movies. I'd love to remake a couple of Ray Harryhausen pictures as well, because I just like to get monsters on the screen. So with a bigger budget and a little bit more time, we could really deliver something special.
Thank you very much.
Hey, you're welcome. And I love the costume.